ॐ भद्रं कर्णेभिः शृणुयाम देवाः भद्रं पश्येमाक्षभिर्यजत्राः स्थिरैरङ्गैः सुष्ठुवागं सस्तनूभिः व्यशेम देवहितं यदायुः। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। ॐ सं समिध्यो वशे विशन्नग्ने विश्वानेर्या इडस्पदे समिध्यसे सनो वसुन्याभर संगच्छध्वं संवदध्वं संवो मनांसि जानताम् देवा भागे यथा पूर्वे संजानाना उपासते समानो मंत्र समिति समानी समानं मन सहचित्यमेषां समानं मंत्र अभिमन्त्रयेव समानेन वो हविषा जुहोमि समानीव आकूर्ति समान हृदयानिव समानमस्तु वो मनो यथा वस्वससासति ईशावास्यमिदगं सर्वं यत् किञ्च जगत्यां जगत् तेन त्यक्तेन भुञ्जीथा मा गृथ कस्य सिद्ध्यनम्। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः।
Namaskar and good afternoon, and welcome to yet another edition of Vimarsh. I would like to welcome and thank Shri Rajiv Malhotra and Dr. Vijay Vishwanathan to the VIF once again for today's Vimarsh discussion. You would recall that on the 30th September last year, the VIF had organized an event to release the author's much celebrated book, Snakes in the Ganga, Breaking India 2.0. The 800 pages are very well researched, have a lot of information and data. And this book exposes the expanding ecosystem of Hindu phobia in the Western academic and media circles. Regrettably, Indian scholars, universities, and other institutions are also open to this. And this is the point which was made by the authors in that discussion. The book has raised awareness in India about the complex, ongoing information warfare that impacts Indian society and India's national security. So I think it has made a tremendous contribution to the shenanigans of in the Western circles and their much wider impact on national security. So we can say that today's event is in continuation of our previous discussion. Shri Rajiv Malhotra and Dr. Vijay Vishwanathan are going to speak on the 7 tectonic forces undermining India and how to confront and defeat them. Shri Malhotra is the founder of non-profit Infinity Foundation, which is dedicated to researching civilization from historical, social sciences, and mind sciences perspectives. Initially trained as a physicist and a computer scientist, Shri Malhotra became an entrepreneur and ran several IT companies before he founded Infinity Foundation. He is the author of a number of books, and several years ago, he had written yet another book, which was Breaking India Forces, which alerted us to the highly motivated and dangerous academic researches going on in the Western academic circles with the aim of hurting and dismantling Indian society. Dr. Vijaya Vishwanathan holds an MBA from Wharton Business School and has had a successful career in manufacturing and finance in the US, Singapore, and Europe. She has studied Vedanta, Dharmic and Civilizational Thought, and she serves on the board of the Infinity Foundation. We also have with us two eminent discussants on the panel. They will offer their comments on Sri Rajiv Malhotra's views and thesis. Ambassador Kanwal Sibal is known to all of you, a former foreign secretary and India's ambassador to Turkey, Egypt, and France. Professor Sujit Datta is a distinguished fellow and editor of VIF's quarterly journal National Security. He was senior professor and Mahatma Gandhi Chair of Peace and Conflict Studies at the Nelson Mandela Center for Peace and Conflict Resolution at Jamia Millia. Now I request Shri Rajiv Malhotra to kindly make his remarks, and that will be followed by Dr. Vijay Vishwanathan's remarks.
Namaste. Is the volume okay?
Yeah.
So thank you for inviting me. This is a further elaboration of the work we presented in the context of snakes in the Ganga. But you don't need to have seen heard the previous talk or read the book to understand this. You can understand this as a further crystallization and read the book at any time you want. The 7 tectonic forces I want to talk about basically are forces because we have not studied the root cause, and these forces come out of a root cause, which is what in my previous book, Being Different, I call Western universalism. Western universalism means the West has certain experience of history and philosophy, what happened to the West. And so based on that, they've developed social sciences and all kind of theories, which they project on the entire world. And they universalize their theories as being applicable to everybody else, as though we don't have our own social theories. So this Western universalism means the widespread use of Western social sciences, what they think of, what is their idea of secularism, of democracy, of human rights, of social justice, of feminism, and on and on and on. And this gets sort of projected everywhere. And thanks to the English language, it's become pretty widespread. Now, Purva Paksha is our traditional method of reversing the gaze and examining other people at a very deep level. And we have not done enough Purva Paksha of Western social sciences, with the result that we are reactive. When something happens, BBC says something, Jai Shankar reacts. When George Soros says something, then Jai Shankar reacts, Prime Minister reacts, or whoever reacts, our intellectuals react. But they are unable to understand what is the deep causation. There is superficial causation, and which is like if you go to a doctor, he just cures your problem superficially. But if you go to a very good doctor, a good Ayurvedic doctor, he'll want to understand the root cause. And the root cause is much deeper. Unless you understand the root cause, you're really not going to solve the problem. You might solve some symptoms temporarily. So it's insufficient and inadequate to counter the BBC report or some report in Wall Street Journal or some human rights report from the US or whatever, or George Soros and so on. That's like putting out fires, and there's no limit to how many such fires will keep coming unless we go to the root cause. So many years ago, I developed something called 5 waves of Indology. Indology is a study of India, and there are 5 waves. Starting with Marxism, and then post-colonial studies, and then subaltern studies, and so on and so forth. And each of them produced its own discourse on India and created a whole ecosystem of people who followed that discourse. These were planted in the media, in our academic system, in our policy making, and so on. And till today, you see this kind of approach to the study of India in our NCRT books. For example, if you take sociology, or you look at the UPSC exam, you'll see all of this there. It really hasn't changed a whole lot. So it's not surprising that the West has come up with what you may call the sixth wave, which I described in Snakes in the Ganga, which takes all these previous waves of studying us and makes it go even further. I won't discuss all the details of what it is, but I will tell you what are the seven-pronged tsunami that this has resulted in because we have not taken care of it. First is ideological, new ideologies. These new ideologies, which we discussed as critical race theory, critical caste theory, new ideas of social justice, new ideas of who's the oppressor and who's the oppressed. This is the ideological warfare that has been going on. And a large ecosystem of such people has been constructed both internationally and in India. That is a surprising part for many of you that such people exist in India. In fact, they're leading such activities. The second tectonic force is education. Harvard, as the sort of epicenter, has created a huge amount of discourse on this and given it international currency because of the Harvard name. And unfortunately, our national education policy has imported many of those ideas into liberal arts. The NEP is very good for STEM, science, technology, medicine, engineering, these kind of things. But when it comes to liberal arts and social sciences, it just says, it opens the floodgates and says we should include liberal arts in IITs and IIMs and all that. But since we have not taken the time and effort to cultivate our own idea of liberal arts, like Vedic liberal arts, for example. So what happens is these positions are filled by people trained in Harvard or trained by others who've been trained in Harvard. So this, you are really importing a kind of Western Harvard type liberal arts into Indian technology enterprises, which is actually making things worse. And now a further development has just been announced some weeks ago that foreign universities will be allowed to open campuses, thinking like they're doing us a favor. So what it means is that the people I'm criticizing, the people I've been fighting 30 years of my life, are now being welcome. I'm fighting on behalf of our country, our culture, and I'm taking all the hits because MEA is not fighting. And the people who are taking are supposed to be the watchdogs and looking after our civilization. They're not sticking their head out, facing them and fighting. They're here talking to like-minded people. But I'm out there fighting and facing all the anger and all the whatever comes back. And now all of a sudden I realize that they have slipped the ground from under my feet because our own government has said, okay, we welcome those people. And there is no controls in that. So what will happen is the UGC controls the syllabus of Indian universities, what they'll teach. But it is very clear that in this agreement that UGC will have no control over what the other foreigners teach. So foreigners will have more freedom than our own universities. It's not even a level playing field. Also, UGC controls salaries and tuitions and so on. And now it says very clearly they will not control the salaries of these foreign universities, nor the tuition levels. So what will happen is they will bring in entirely the curriculum of the people that we've been fighting against. They will bring in all those professors. They will suck up the best faculty in India by giving them double, triple the salary and charge high fees so that the elitist students from elitist families can afford it. And then they'll come up with their own quota to see who is on their side and give them free seats and all that. So they will be educating the next generation. What can be more foolish than allowing that and, in fact, welcoming that? The third of the tectonic forces I've listed are Indian industrialists. It's very strange that Indian industrialists like Mahindra and Lakshmi Mittal and Piramal and Tatas and Bajaj and all these people, Ranayan Murthis, they are funding these kind of forces overseas. They are giving their money and millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars to fund them. And we have shown dozens and dozens of examples of the anti-India stuff that's coming out of there. But our people are funding it. So their name is on. So when a professor from such a university whose title says Lakshmi Mittal and Family Director of South Asia Studies, or his title is Mahindra, Director of Mahindra Humanities Center at Harvard, or his title is Reliance Dhirubhai Ambani Professor at Stanford. You know, these are very credible titles. Any doors will open. Doors open in India. They come in here and they're welcome. But what people haven't done even the basic research to see who are these professors. Some of the most anti-India professors are these. So we've allowed this to happen. And then foreign consultants. There's a lot of foreign consultants, the Deloitte and E&Y and the McKinsey's and PricewaterhouseCoopers and these sort of people are all over the place giving advice on what is meant by diversity. They're bringing the American idea of diversity here, which they don't really understand, and writing policy for Niti Aayog. Some of them are consultants for Niti Aayog. A lot of the artificial intelligence, data mining, data security policies are being written by these people. We need policies to protect us from them. But actually, they are the ones writing these policies. And they're often doing it as a favor. We think they're doing us a favor because they're more advanced, they're more sophisticated. इनको ज़्यादा मालूम होगा, गोरे लोग हैं, इनको पता होगा, तो इन्होंने हमको शाबाश कह दिया तो बहुत अच्छा होगा. We have this inferiority complex. And you know, one of the worst things that's happening is the use of foreign indexes. Foreign index means like diversity, equity, inclusion index, ESG index. Now there is an index on religious pluralism for the corporate. An American foundation closely linked with Harvard and with the church and with the World Economic Forum has developed an index to measure how much religious pluralism you have in your company. And now they are going to launch in India in September with big Indian organizations. This September they're announced already. And in the US, if you see the pattern, they're entering all these big multinationals and creating in the HR department a cell which promotes religious pluralism. But religious pluralism as measured by them is according to their idea of what is meant by pluralism. So they brought me on their board of advisors, and I joined just to learn. And then I learned how they're operating, what they're doing. And then I started raising issues. They asked me to write an article in their newsletter. They said, oh, India is so great. Hinduism is so pluralistic. It is so important. We finally have a good voice. You have to tell us, please. We are very interested in you. All that nice stuff they know how to do. So when I turned in an article, which is very clear, they said that these few paragraphs we have to remove. So I said, well, if you remove these paragraphs, then it's not what I want to say. Well, anyway, they published my article without a few of the paragraphs, and I resigned because I said I don't want you to use my name in a way that is not very honest. The fourth area, tectonic force, is technical giants. Technology giants from the US and China are data mining. They use this data to weaponize algorithms. These algorithms partly understand us, partly manipulate us. It's like the person who understands you very closely also can use that to manipulate you. So the more somebody understands you, the more they can manipulate you, and for that they need big data, and that is what these people are doing. And I call this digital colonization. Unfortunately, India doesn't have any precautions. You'll see many examples. Harvard collaborating with Niti Aayog on data mining. Kriya University and Yale University doing data mining in the villages in Tamil Nadu, huge number of tens of thousands of villages capturing all kind of data. Ashoka and the French Ministry of External Affairs, they have database on every single election since independence, down from the panchayat level to the central government level and all the states, municipalities, every little detail of who won, who lost, the demographics, what the trends are by district, by every kind of variable possible. And they're training their algorithms to predict, to understand how Indian democracy works, who to manipulate, where are the fault lines, where are the pressure points, how do you get in? And nobody has bothered that, hey, listen, this is very valuable insight. Why are we letting these people in? And they are collaborating with the help of Indian institutions, like Ashoka is one of them. So then a lot of organizations like Omidiyar Network are not only doing surveillance, but using the surveillance to make policies and the part of the Indian government policy makers to create policies which are good for Indian freedom and human rights and all of that. Plus, because they have deep pockets, they are far worse than Soros, by the way. They have deep pockets. They influence the Indian youth because they're investing in the ventures of these young people. They've invested $500 million in India, over 200 ventures, startup ventures in technology, and they're taking the bright technical minds of India by giving them venture capital investment. They're winning them over ideologically, so that these people, this will be a huge army, a huge footprint they have all over India, with young people, young Indians doing the dirty work, young Indians doing it, but not aware that they are doing this work that could be harmful. These young people you can't blame because they're getting a job. Somebody more strategic has to connect the dots and figure out what's going on and do something about it. So you can't blame these young people who are working for Omidiyar network. There was recently a big scandal that Qualcomm used their funding to fund an organization which was doing conversion in a village, and somebody blew the whistle. He had to leave Qualcomm, and he's written all these articles. So this sort of mischief is going on. Chinese have infiltrated a whole lot of Indian technology for data mining and for creating these algorithms. So now what you have is algorithms become trained to serve as breaking India forces. So you don't need a human being to write an op-ed or to stop this one, deplatform that one, boost that one. The algorithms are able to do all that. The person who owns the algorithm has the power, because the owner of the algorithm is the final authority on what these algorithms will be optimized to do, what is the success they're trying to achieve, and then these algorithms go and do all sorts of things. So when I complain to one of these social media platforms that they have been unfair to something I posted, they just pass it on to some algorithm, and they say that the algorithm decides, as if algorithm is God, and because algorithm decided, therefore I have no argument. That sort of strange situation. Now, Indians have failed to create our own platforms, whether it's operating systems, whether it's search engines, whether it is a language model like Chat GPT, whether it is AI engines, all kind of things that are driving this new digital economy. We think that digitization means give broadband and inexpensive terminal, but we have not bothered about the content and who controls this content and who controls the algorithms deciding which content people are seeing. So the kids in the villages who have this broadband and who may have these terminals and these mobile phones, the question is what is the content they're watching and who decides the type of content which gets promoted and boosted. That is something that our people have not given much attention to. The punchline of what I'm saying is that even though education is very important, and I'm very critical that we need to improve our education system, more important than educating children is the education of algorithms. Because algorithms are like the teachers of tomorrow. Like you do teacher training as more important than training the students, because if you train the teachers, they will train the students, and you have more leverage. One teacher you train, he will train thousands of students. So it's better to train the teachers. But now the algorithms are the teachers. This whole new education system all over the world is turning into AI-based education. And so the people who have all these AI platforms are the ones who are in position to develop courses on all kinds of things and sneak in biases, civilizational biases. And the way those algorithms have been trained, sometimes very subtly, is going to be like having a teacher in class who's got a certain bias. But the scale is much bigger. The scale is huge compared to human teachers. And people have this false sense of security that because it's a computer and the computer doesn't have emotions, therefore it must be neutral. That's what we are told, but none of that is true. Now, the fifth one is media. There is the Newman Media School at Harvard, in collaboration with Pulitzer, And they have collaborated with people in India, like Azim Premji has created an organization where a lot of billionaires are putting in their money, and then this money is allocated to all sorts of media people in India, who then write all kind of articles. So instead of going after one journalist and here and one journalist there, I think you have to track the money source and say, and the source of knowledge. Where is this? Who funds it? And then who funds that? And then who funds that? And also, where is this knowledge coming from? All the way back to the ideology. Where are the ideology centers? Where are these ideology centers where they're training the BBC people, where they're training the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post people? So unless you go to the real adda, the root, you are not solving the problem. And the irony is that not only we are ignoring the root, we're actually supporting them. We're sending Indian bureaucrats to be trained overseas by these kind of places. And we are also, funding some of these places. So that's kind of a tragedy. The sixth is the judiciary. This may surprise you, but Justice Chandrachud is very fond of quoting all these kind of people. He, in fact, in one lecture after another, he quotes all these theories that are coming from overseas. So his views are not like he has independently come up with all this. He is informed by these things. He's well connected with they celebrate him as a very successful product. Imagine you have created a product and put him in the head of the Supreme Court. It's a very big deal. You are successful. This is what more could you want? You take the biggest democracy and you put the top guy in the Supreme Court who's your product. What a big deal. I mean, it's like if I was telling one RSS leader the other day, it's like you have a Shakha product and he's one of the pracharaks and you make him head of some country's top government or something. You will say, wow, we are running that country. So that is how successful this is, to have these kind of people planted here. Finally, is the most sensitive and controversial of the seven tectonic forces, and that is the myopic Hindus, our own people, who actually are sometimes very proud of these kind of things which are harming us, sometimes ignorant, sometimes they will apologize for them and justify them and say, no, this is fine. But ultimately it's because they haven't really worked hard, they haven't studied it, they are ignorant about it. And so we are impressed with the superficial approach to civilization. We have symbols, we build a temple here, we change the name of a road, we start having some holidays and rituals and so on. All this is very important. The superficial narrative is very emotionally important for people. It will get you votes. But there are deeper levels of narrative which have to do with policy making, which have to do with the deep systems like the algorithms I talked about. Unless we control those, so a superficial approach to solving the problem is not going to be enough. Give us, in fact, a false sense of security. So with that, I will close. Those are I'll just list what the seven are real quick, and then I will close, and we can have Q&A later. So number one, ideologies. Number two, education. Number three, Indian industry. Number four, tech giants. Number five, the media trained overseas. Number six, Indian judiciary. And number seven, myopic Hindus. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Vijay?
Namaskar. I just want to give a few examples to drive home the points that Rajiv ji just made. So there are errors of commission through policy. These are errors that perhaps could be said to have deep impact on the country by subscribing to certain policies. And then, of course, there are errors of omission, things that we haven't done through policy. and which leaves us in the state that we see ourselves in today. Rajiv ji talked about how owning AI platforms and owning algorithms is really important and is the most important thing that we should be thinking of today. The next important thing is education. It's very close to my heart. Education is something that we haven't taken charge of. So the liberal arts education, before we bring it into India, we should ask ourselves, what has it done for the West, which is trying to export this? Because education is big business in the West. There's no concept of Vidyadanam. So let's look at the report card of Western liberal arts, and by liberal arts, I'm loosely translating it as social sciences, especially. Because under the umbrella of liberal arts in the West, you also have some pure sciences, but we're purely talking about social sciences. Now, in America, you find a whole generation of youngsters educated in Western liberal arts, social sciences, who are skillless, who have no skill and cannot be employed. Because studies like a major in gender studies and African American studies and anything ending with studies is thought of as just a narrative and a program in indoctrination, which leaves you skillless. In fact, this is happening in Ashoka University too. We pay 40 lakhs for a 4-year course in gender studies. Ashoka University proudly says that unlike other gender studies program, we actually have gender and sexuality studies, which is sort of the up-to-date latest in these kinds of hoax subjects. But anyway, so these youngsters in America are not able to find jobs. Yeah, not only that, they are saddled with heavy loans because they've taken tens of thousands of dollars to pay for this education. And now Joe Biden is trying to forgive these loans in order to get their votes. But essentially, you have a generation that is graduating, have no skills, are burdened with a lot of loans, and living in their parents' basements. This is what's happening in America. So we have to first see if this is actually working in the country that produced this kind of knowledge, and whether it's working for them, and what are the merits of that. Now, interestingly, the left is very smart and organized and institutionalized. So the only jobs that these people can get are the ones that are academic end up getting into academia to produce more of this nonsense academic papers, and the others who cannot get into academics will end up joining DEI offices and administrative positions in universities. You'd be surprised to know that most of these so-called top universities in the US, Yale University, for example, has a 1-to-1 ratio of undergrad student to administrative staff. These are not professors teaching. So for every undergraduate student in Yale, and the undergraduate population is around 1,500 students, there are 1,500 administrative positions. And guess who's paying for it? It is the undergraduate student. And no wonder they're saddled with debt. So this is how they get employment. Yeah, they are non-value added, unskilled, just fat in the system that everybody's paying for. Now, the left is also very smart and cunning about placing these same people in corporates where Rajiv ji talked about ESG, which is an environment, social justice, and governance, which is now part of every corporate HR department, where they do caste sensitivity training, diversity training, things like that. So these are the people that go into these positions to do this kind of training. And all this is coming into India. You have DEI offices in IIT Delhi. Not only have we teaching social sciences in India at the IITs and the IIMs, we're also having DEI offices and increasing the administrative burden. And guess who's paying for it? It's taxpayer money for this unnecessary kind of diversity training and caste sensitivity training. So we have to ask ourselves before bringing in all this, what has it produced overseas? Very objectively, it's just not an ideological thing. Is it producing anything of value addition? And so this is how we can successfully unskill India. All this talk of skilling India, we are actually going to be using hard-earned money and bringing in these universities and pumping in our own money, and they're going to have non-profit status and tax exemption and all of this, and producing unskilled workers who can do nothing else than activism. That's all they're fit for. And so we should really sit down and ask if we should even bother educating a whole generation. I think they are better off not going to college, honestly. So the other point I wanted to make on what we could do, Rajiv ji talked about owning these indexes and doing surveys. We definitely need to do some survey on China studies. How is China studies done in India? How is China trying to indoctrinate Indians through Chinese studies program? And this is like the Confucius Institutes. We have to study them carefully to see what is being taught, who's teaching it, whose narrative is it, and where this whole program is going. Because Ashoka University also has a China Studies program, which has all kinds of links. So we need to look at that. Now, many of you may know that recently the Seattle City Council passed an ordinance saying that caste would be protected like race, yeah, and there should be no discrimination as it relates to caste. Now, this is a small city council, and this is an ordinance that was passed, but it has tremendous impact. If this gets rolled out, which I think it will, through many more cities in the US, you can have caste as a protected category all over US, which will affect tens of thousands of Hindus and Indians in the diaspora, because this basically says that anybody could take offense or could consider any offense as a caste-based offense between two Indians, and there's no way to actually prove this. And caste and any kind of discrimination is taken very seriously in the West. And this has huge repercussions, and corporates are going to adopt it, and then this is going to come into India through the corporates, and they're going to mandate these kinds of rules within the corporation where everybody will be forced. It's like a thought reform process where they'll be forced to go through caste sensitivity training, and you have to atone for things that you never did, even just to get out of the caste training. So these are all very serious matters. They are programs to brainwash and have a thought reform like the Maoist Chinese kind of cultural reform, right? So there are thought reform programs through diversity, equity, inclusion training. So these are very, very serious issues that we should look at. Another interesting sort of study that came out from Pew Research, and this is an example to show that we don't own any of these surveys or indices, but how far the left has gone. So they have a few years ago, Pew Charitable Trust, which is a very big nonprofit in the US, conducted something called Cultural Chauvinism Survey. And I was so surprised to see what they asked. They went around Europe and asked people, do you think that your culture is superior to other cultures? And I would think that's a positive thing. In fact, we just launched a book called Varna Jati Caste, where we talk about Varna pride and how important it is to have Varna pride. And because we have a strong sense of identity, nobody can turn you into an activist or manipulate you, because the identity holds you in good stand. So they go around Europe and asking people, do you think your culture is superior to others? And of course, wherever wokeism has infiltrated, which is in Western Europe, only 20 to 40%, Spain being the worst, France bad, around 30%, said that they didn't think that their culture was superior. Whereas Russia and Eastern Europe, the percentage of people who said their cultures were superior was around 70%. And so the French education minister saw this survey and got really rattled by it. And he immediately said that, he wanted to introduce, develop culture in the youth and introduce the classics back into education, the Latin and Greek back into education. So that he thought that this would be a good way to fight the proliferation of wokeism in France. So I wonder if we did such a similar survey, what the results would be. But these are things that we should be doing, because we should own these indices and also put out surveys on Hinduphobia overseas where they weaponize caste. And we should also look at how all these ideologies are affecting our own youth in India itself. So with that, I can answer questions later. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rajiv, Malhotra ji, and thank you, Vijay ji. Both of you have raised some very pertinent questions, but also very disturbing questions, I must say, in the sense that we have to find answers to them. And I think probably everyone sitting here would agree with what you have said. And you have been doing it for several years. I've seen many of your videos, and I think you have been at it for a long time. 30 years, yes. But I've seen last few years, I've seen, in fact, I saw your video on Chandrachud before he became the CGI, just about that time. I have a video there. So what do we do? I think that's the question. So I'll now turn to our very experienced discussants, Ambassador Kamal Singh. आप जा सकें वहाँ पे आ जाए तो ठीक है.
Well, as Arvind has said, one can't disagree with what Rajiv has said. So what does one discuss? We say we agree. Genuinely, I find it very difficult to disagree with him on any of the points that he has made. The issue is not agreement or disagreement. The issue is what we do. And there I don't have any answer to give, because what we do is not simply government deciding or bureaucrats deciding. The society has to decide. And how do you mobilize the society? And since we differ on every single issue, and more today, then how do we mobilize society to understand, appreciate the depth of these problems and have consensus building which spans the entire country? There's a clear divide in many ways between the North and the South, where you can see that the non-BJP ruled states have a particular view of our social problems and our plurality and our religious composition and what we should do with regard to minority issues. And there is, in fact, in some cases, a campaign against Hinduism as such. So how do you then, at the national level in a federal system, create that consensus which goes deep into how we live effectively? The challenges that you mentioned, therefore, in my mind, are not so easy to address. With regard to the new ideologies, critical race theory, and deciding who are the oppressed and who are the oppressors, and critical caste theory. Now, the problem is that all these new ideas percolate very, very easily into India. At one level, the fact that we are English speaking has always been taught by us as being of great advantage. Though, mind you, sometimes I ask myself, the Chinese don't speak any wretched English language, and look at them. Their economy is 4 or 5 times bigger. The Japanese don't speak much English language, but they have been able to develop their economies. But somehow we feel that unless we have access to the English language, we somehow can't become modern and advanced and be a player in the world. Now, because we have this English language, we are exposed immediately, meaning all the society at large, especially the student community, through social media even more and more, immediately exposed to all these ideas. And since they come from the West, they look very fashionable. And youngsters are very proud to imbibe these ideas to show how much more advanced they are sociologically than other more backward, ignorant kind of people who have not absorbed these ideas. The other day I was at the Hindu college speaking, and I asked the students who had organized this talk for me as to what was the depth of infiltration of these woke ideas into the student community, and I was told very considerable. So there it is. How do you combat them? And when it comes to caste, our political system is encouraging caste in a very obvious way, in the sense that caste factors, no matter what discourse we give, that some of BJ's programs are such and policies are such that they're going beyond caste and stuff like that. But the fact is that the consideration of caste is central to our doing politics. People may have this or that view. The caste census that Bihar is organizing, purely from the point of view of diluting the element of caste in our politics, in our society, this kind of a thing of now making caste surveys and see how many percentages there are of different variety of castes, and on that basis, then reservation should be given. So this is another way of dividing society and not being able to go beyond caste. So when you have this critical caste theory being developed in the United States and the Seattle Council does this, and the instigator of that is a lady from India, of Indian origin. That becomes then the benchmark of what we should do here. And I find the Indian Express has a regular column on Dalitology or something like that, which, mind you, in terms of an analysis of what the situation historical and present is not wrong. But what I find is that the purpose of this, and because a lot of distortions in what I read those articles, a lot of distortions in them, and the purpose is actually to create further divisions. And there are these foreign scholars, Christopher Jaffrello and others, who actually try and probe these fault lines. And they do a lot of research. It's not as if it is not researched properly. They do a lot of research, but it's the constant focus. Ignore everything else, ignore anything positive that is happening, but keep plugging away at this so that nobody forgets that this is a big problem in India, which needs to be resolved. So it's part of their narrative against India. Now, with regard to the liberal new education policy, when it was announced, now I'm not an expert on educational matters, but my first reaction, which I put on my Twitter thing also, was that by all means, have the universities come into the technical side. But for heaven's sake, don't bring them into the liberal arts. Because then you are creating absolutely the kind of problems that Rajiv is talking about, or Vidya is talking about. But yet, I think when it comes to coming into the area of technology and stuff like that, there are not those kind of profits to be made. But when it comes to the liberal arts, then it's much easier to make money and then create this whole bunch of unskilled people who have no particular use to the society in terms of modernizing and developing it, but in terms of job creation, maybe. So, but then the UGC chairman seems to believe that this is a very good idea, and he has defended this policy in a big write-up in one of the papers. And then the thought occurred to me, which again is a very banal thought, there's nothing profound in it, that if we talk about our heritage, about our great universities, Nalanda, what have you, and suddenly we find that we are unable to develop our own educational system and we need the West to come here and improve it and set up a university. So what happened? To all the great tradition that we hark back to, the biggest university in the world at one time and stuff like that. So there is a big gap in what we talk about our heritage and everything else, and on the ground, this sort of mixed messaging where we think that the only way out for us is to imbibe fully Western education. With regard to Indian industrialists, setting chairs in foreign universities, it has been criticized. But many of these have been educated in Harvard or in Yale or in Wharton and this and that, and somehow they feel that they owe something to these institutions, and then it gives them an international profile. So there's ego involved in this. So they do this. If they were doing it on a large scale in India, maybe yes, we would understand this little weakness of theirs to earn foreign applause. But I think this is an issue in the context of the problems that have been raised. With regard to technology, data mining, and everything else, I think our people understand this, but we are not sure as to how to deal with this in the context of two things. One is that there's immense pressure on us from the Americans. I've been the last couple of days attending the conferences on the IE initiative for critical and emerging technologies, with a whole range of people from our side at top levels who are involved in this, because the NSAs on both sides have led this. And there is this concern that we have to have a data law which is acceptable to the Americans, because otherwise we'll not be able to capitalize internationally, especially as we want to, in terms of the India stack and everything else, and all that we've been saying during the G20 meetings and before, in preparation, about the assets that we have, which we want to share with the world. So how to strike a balance where we are able to project ourselves in this area abroad, and yet do it in a manner in which we do not have a clash with the big tech American and the American administration. Until now, we were able to resist some of these pressures on us by saying that, look, no, we can't sign off on this, we can't sign off on that, as we didn't sign in Japan, in Tokyo, when they had a document which our Prime Minister did not sign, that we don't have a data law ourselves. So once we have a data law, then we can know what we are committing ourselves to. But sooner rather than later, we won't have that excuse left, because we'll have a data law, and then we'll have to take a position. In the case of media, I've been time and again making this point, which of course everybody is impervious to, that our data, our media is that of a banana republic. You know, Rajiv is here, we know, in order to get your views into the Western press by an ambassador, it's very, very, very difficult. They won't give you access. I have personal experiences of that, but I did get access in Egypt or countries like that, where again, they suffer from the same kind of weaknesses as we do. But when it came to France, I tried very hard. But I wrote an article for Le Monde at their request. They wouldn't publish it because it stated government position. They don't want a government position. They are comfortable if it is an anti-government position. So Arundhati Roy can write and they'll accept it. But here, and I'm amazed that every other day, foreign ambassadors are writing in our press, condemning Russia, on Ukraine, this and that, knowing fully well that our government's position on our relations with Russia is known. It's a friendly country, and the diplomatic etiquette is that third country ambassadors in a friendly country don't attack third countries with which India is friendly. But this is now, other day, yesterday, or day before, Borrell was interviewed in Indian Express or something. And leading questions, asking him, what do you think about India's position on Ukraine? What do you think of this? What do you think? All the issues on which they have been critical, you ask them questions. You give them an occasion to pronounce on them, and then you publish it. I don't understand that. I know why this is happening, but still, I mean, at the end of the day, all of us, we may be in different capacities in our country, bureaucrats or journalists or this or that, but the country is the country and the national interest is the national interest. It doesn't mean that journalists can have a view of national interest which totally differs from the view of the rest of society. But we have this fellow, Jaffrelo, who writes regularly, and I've told the Indian Express, well, why do you do that? And then they have this Ashutosh Varshney. And I was surprised that he other day visited India and went to Gujarat and someplace and has written another piece that was, well, not too bad a piece because the sense of the piece was a bit different, but he did introduce towards the end some negative pet theories of his about our social things. But they come and go and they do the studies. I think we should have some mechanism where these busybodies are not allowed to come to India. But they do. Then judiciary, it is becoming too much. Now, yesterday or the day before, the Supreme Court has said that the CGI will be a part of the appointments committee of the election commissioner and the chief election commissioner. So I tweeted on that the FBI in the United States, the crime agency in the UK, which are counterparts of FBI, the National Crime Agency, the election commissions in the United States, and the election commission in the UK. Nothing to do with the judiciary, nothing at all. But yet, CGI is a part of this. It's a big slap in the face of the government that under a particular article of the Constitution, the president appoints the election commissioners. Why is the government ceding its executive power to the judiciary so easily? There's no fight back at all. And that is emboldening when I think if there's contempt of court here, I suppose we are protected from that in Vivekananda International Foundation or not. But I really do find the conduct of the Chief Justice, and I've been following his speech. Incidentally, I asked a few people when I go abroad as to whether Chief Justices or justices in the country talk so much as our judges and Chief Justices do. They don't. And for a very good reason. Their job is to deliver justice, not to propound to the public their social theories, their this theory, their that theory, because then that compromises their neutrality in the eyes of those who want justice from the judiciary. But we do that here for every little convocation invited, and they give you long lectures, or when they deliver judgments, they pontificate on all sorts of social issues. I don't know what's happening, and the government is unable to control this. And finally, you said something about myopic Hindus. Yes, I think it is an issue because we are not aware of what the issues are, what the problems are, what damage it is doing to us, what damage it can do to us in the future. We somehow have this feeling we've survived for 5,000 years and we'll survive for another 5,000 years. And this has been our line of defense, even in diplomacy. when we've been attacked, we say, look, don't worry. We are a 5,000-year-old civilization, and we have survived. All of the old civilizations of the West and East have disappeared, but we have survived, so we're not worried. But but I think our civilization may not be collapsed, but we have to manage ourselves and develop ourselves and reach the kind of stature globally that we aspire to, and of course for the welfare of our people. Whether we can do that with all the lack of awareness of the forces working against us is an issue that. And finally, this Vasudev Kutumbakam. The other day, the judges of the Supreme Court said that, Hinduism is a way of life. We have those who have come and invaded us have been assimilated. So I asked the question, then why did the temples get razed? Why did conversions take place? Why was India divided? Because the people whom we assimilated, they just divided, took away a large part of our country. And why is this terrorism? So this business about believing in these kind of shibboleths and not applying your mind, and at that level of society, is ridiculous, ridiculous. But there it is. So, Rajivji, I don't think the problems you have raised will be solved very easily, but keep trying.
Thank you very much, sir. May I request Professor Sujit Datta?
Thank you. Rajivji and Dr. Vishwanathan made some very perceptive points, and they've been making it for quite some time through their writings and speeches here, elsewhere as well, regarding the kind of intellectual and ideological challenges that the West, and particularly the United States and Britain, pose as far as India is concerned, how they interpret Indian society, and the nature of textbooks and books that are being produced, which then in turn not only influence many policymakers, thinkers, writers, scholars, etc., but most importantly, Harvard and these academic institutions deeply shape thinking of multilateral institutions as well. World Bank, IMF, etc., take their positions and their formulations very significantly in account when assessing a country's risk environment and their credibility, etc. In addition, of course, many of these things feature into indices on democracy and other types of areas that are also vital elements in addition to the media and academia that today are actively involved in what is called democracy promotion. Now, democracy promotion has over the years, at least since the 70s, but most prominently through the post-Cold War period, become a prominent part of the liberal agenda. And certainly private organizations, universities that have shaped it, but they're deeply interlinked with the State Department and various official institutions that promote them as policies. So they're done through many of these academic institutions, and even the Pentagon and others are deeply involved in research, supporting research and ideological elements, along with which can merge and promote these ideas, along with even as they fund big tech and those kinds of things in California. So we have an issue here that you have reflected well and discussed in many ways, and your work is valuable in terms of, I think, creating a body of literature which will be available to those who are interested in doing so, to the students community, the scholarly community, that would like to know what kind of research is going on, what are kind of theories are emerging, what are the new elements of understanding this world. And the world is changing very rapidly. Now, I have two to three issues here for that, something of some of which Ambassador Sybil has already commented on. But I would like to place a few things as to the structural problems inherent in this so-called tension. India's relations with the West go back to our interaction that began with the British colonial period. And that history and experience has been extremely negative as far as we are concerned. The destruction of many things that are of Indian origin, our industry, agriculture, the heritage, culture, all were affected. But most prominently, in terms of the area that we're talking about, that is our intellectual work, 1835 is a landmark, and the imposition of English onto the Indian population is heritage that has stayed with us despite decolonization that began in post-1947 period. So decolonization never went thoroughly into our educational system, as a result of which English remains a strong medium of instruction and into the entire body of literature that we study and give access to the Anglo-American literature in particular in every area of our study. Now, this is an inherent structural feature that shapes the mind of all students who go into higher education in particular, but also in lower education where teachers are influenced by these kinds of Western literature in particular. And gradually what happens is over time, from nursery rhymes to stories, to analysis, nature of analysis, plus educational methodologies from the school level to kindergarten level onwards are deeply shaped by Western theories that are part and parcel of this educational system and the linguistic element that dominates it. And so I think one of the biggest failures and why some of these problems are prominent here, and I wouldn't say that the problem is not prominent elsewhere, even in non-English speaking countries, but prominent in English speaking countries that were colonized, particularly India, is the linguistic factor and the lack of attention to the teaching in mother tongue. And I think new education policy does one important thing, that it started stressing the importance of mother tongue education at all levels, where English will be taught at a certain level, I think fifth or sixth standard, as a foreign language and essential foreign language, which is the right way to go about it. It can be French, English, whatever, but we need a language that is also links us to the rest of the world, connects us with the scientific and other research, and the overall flow of ideas and debates that are taking place globally. So I think the stress on mother tongue and education in the mother tongue is critically important. But that raises this next set of questions, and that is, if mother tongue is going to be the nature of education communication, then textbooks and books have to be prepared that are advanced and scientifically advanced and contemporary and well crafted to take into account both our cultural needs, our political needs, our economic needs, and our intellectual and scientific needs. And they're in tune with the advancement in the thought and debates in the rest of the world. So that means a whole set of new generation of teachers, as well as textbooks, etc., that need to be prepared. So language goes with educational training and elements and textbooks. They go with teachers training and teachers education. The second element is that this relationship with the West, as far as India is concerned, has been one that is, on the one hand, deeply abusive, deeply destructive, deeply negative, but on the other hand, deeply attractive. And therefore, our students find it extremely important to visit and study in Oxford, Cambridge, various American and British universities, Australian universities. They go there in hordes and try and get that degree. And that degree has, because of the nature of the English and the elite training here, has very high value in the market. So there is a structural linkages here as well in terms of the attractiveness of many Western ideas, most of Western universities, and even journalism, well, before the Newman Foundation, etc., began doing whatever they're doing here, the Columbia School of Journalism and others, very attractive places where Indian journalists were going and learning their skills. So there's been this deep interactive process by which Western ideas, Western education has been valued, and many of our policymakers, educationists, intellectuals, journalists, etc., have been trained in these schools for a very, very long time. It goes into over much before today, and it's been continuing and growing. In fact, as the Indian demand for higher education grows, the university system cannot meet it, and the attractiveness of going abroad and getting a degree only is growing over time, I find. Thirdly, there is this problem of democracy that we share with the West. Now, once you have this democracy issue, unless laws are crafted very carefully, there is no way free flow of ideas can be prevented. The moment free flow of ideas, textbooks, books, and access to various universities, to India, and scholarly exchanges are stopped, it will lead to huge political problems. Censorship will be an issue, and everything will then become political. So this is a real problem as far as the democracy, the nature of the political system that binds us with the West, that is democracy. And in this, the deep liberal networks that have been created across as a result of this democratic systems within India and abroad, connecting us with the rest of the world, Western world, and particularly the rest of the Anglo-American world, is so extensive and deep that it will be very difficult to prevent it. What it is not only what Harvard and Yale and Stanford are saying, but these are ideas that are flourishing here in our universities as well. The network picks it up quickly, and they themselves, because of political reasons, reflect them in their writings. So even if that was stopped, this will continue here. So this the liberal network is deep and extensive, and an extent to both academia, journalism, think tanks, and the judicial legal system, all of which they're linked, intertwined through the English language, English literature, etc., etc., the academic. Finally, the problem that we need is that stopping, banning, etc., etc., would become very difficult, as the BBC, recent BBC controversy showed how controversial and political this all can become. And given the fact that we are encouraging an open trade policy, free trade areas with Europe, Britain, Australia, and greater interaction with the United States in technology, etc., controlling big tech or controlling many of these areas will become very difficult as far as diplomacy management is concerned. So I think many of these things are just structural and part of liberalization and interaction with the deeper interaction with the West. What can be done about it? There seems very little. So what it can be done is essentially at our level and at the internal level. And that internal level, as I said, is rooted in a new language policy as far as textbooks and schooling is concerned, as far as writing new ways based on new teaching methods, and who would do it? Because if you, India is a federal country, there's opposition parties involved, and I think Ambassador Sybil pointed it out. Several of these opposition parties are themselves part and parcel accept these kinds of theories because they are anti-center. Because one of the critical elements of new liberalism is today anti-state, and the entire civil society movement and support for NGOs as more important than political parties is essentially the opinion embedded in new and liberalism that the state itself is evil. The state itself is a problem, and its powers must be weakened. And therefore, human rights and all kinds of rights and liberties can only flourish if the state is weakened and NGOs and civil society movements grow. So we have a problem that in our country itself, you'll face problems from the civil society and opposition parties as far as bringing in large-scale changes here. So we have, as I said, a structural problem built into the system of our ties with the West. We need to interact with them, need to cooperate with them. At the same time, we have real serious ideological, cultural, and security issues with them. That's the real policy challenge of today.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Sujit. So we've heard the two discussants and the authors. I think a number of issues have been raised, and probably we should spend some time on what can be done. And both of them have come to kind of a conclusion that it's going to be very difficult. So I'll open this now for discussion. Right now, okay, fine.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? No. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you. So, first of all, thank you, Ambassador Sybil, because you were very sharp. The 7 points I raised, you responded to each of the 7. So let me, in that spirit, get it back on track again, rather than a broad-based exploration of the West and all that. I think you're right on. So I'm going to propose in rapid-fire succession actionable things.